Okay, let's unpack this. We are doing a deep dive into a story that for decades has really been seen as just high-profile true crime, a fashion
The
tragedy.
murder of Gianni Versace in 1997.
Exactly. But we are not here for the gossip. We've stacked our sources. We're talking investigative reports, criminal justice data, a lot of academic research. And our mission for you is to really pull back that curtain
Right. To look past the sensationalism.
and see the profound and frankly disturbing societal structures this whole event shines a light on.
That's spot on, because if you only remember the lurid details from the media in the late 90s, you really miss the real story.
Mm.
So today we're using the perpetrator, Andrew Cunanan, as a kind of lens. A lens to analyze the specific psychological, social, and cultural context that were swirling around him.
And connect it to something bigger.
Yes. We're going to connect his path of violence not just to his own story, but to these broader structural discussions. Things like addiction, systemic trauma, and the way public health and institutions try to control people in America.
The source material is just fantastic for this because it forces you to make these connections. We're leaning heavily on Maureen Orth's investigative journalism on Cunanan.
Foundational stuff.
Absolutely. And we're pairing that with institutional analysis of the criminal justice system and academic studies that focus on, moral panics and how marginalized communities survive. It's like a societal X-ray, all disguised as a crime story.
So where do we start?
Let's start in the world Versace created, because it was. It was immense. At the time of his death, Gianni Versace wasn't just some designer.
No, not at all. He was a defining cultural force. That fashion empire was valued at, over $800 million?
$807 million, to be exact. And he basically pioneered using celebrities in high fashion. He invented the 1990s supermodel Vogue.
Oh, completely. We're talking about icons like Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista walking his runways. They were stars because of him.
He was a master of this. Powerful, almost addictive allure, which makes his logo, the Medusa head, so important.
Yeah, that came in 93. He found the image on the floor of some ancient ruins near where he grew up.
And the reason he chose her is just chillingly perfect, especially for a story involving an obsessed killer.
It is. The sources say Versace chose Medusa because she made people fall in love so intensely they had no way back. It's this ultimate symbol of, captivating, all-consuming desire.
And just to close the loop on the business side of it, the brand survived. His sister, Donatella, took over as artistic director right after, in 97.
And she did an amazing job modernizing it, but keeping that bold aesthetic. It's a remarkable legacy.
It really is. Though she did recently step down, March 2025, to become the chief brand ambassador. So, the end of an era there.
But back to the tragedy itself. Versace was Cunanan's last victim, shot outside his Miami Beach mansion on July 15th, 1997.
And this was after a nationwide killing spree. 4 other men, including the real estate developer Lee Miglin.
The FBI manhunt was massive, just huge, fueled by Cunanan's chameleon-like ability to just radically change how he looked.
And the end of that chase was so strange, almost anticlimactic. 8 days after the Versace murder, he's found dead.
Suicide. On a houseboat, just 40 blocks away from Versace's home.
He used the same gun that killed 2 of his victims, and he left no suicide note. Which, of course, has just allowed the speculation to run wild for decades.
And this is where the details from the scene get so specific and kind of revealing.
Right.
The police found very few personal belongings on that houseboat, but among them were, tubes of hydrocortisone cream, a totally mundane detail, an unusually extensive collection of fiction by C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis. Wait, the author famous for writing about morality and the huge conflict between good and evil?
Exactly. For a spree killer, a pathological liar known for living in fantasies, that is a profound psychological nugget.
Wow.
It suggests this internal chilling disconnect, like an inner search for moral absolutes happening right alongside the complete amoral reality of what he was doing.
So are the sources suggesting this man who was living in these delusions of grandeur was maybe trying to find some kind of moral grounding through fantasy literature right before he died?
It tells us his reality was completely fractured. And that leads us right to the central unresolved mystery. Why Versace?
Yeah.
Police found no concrete evidence they ever met. But Cunanan was obsessed with him. The Versace family to this day has steadfastly denied any connection.
And yet the conflicting evidence is still out there. FBI agents believe they met in San Francisco.
And investigative reports have eyewitness claims that they interacted in, quote, sex-for-hire circles in Miami and San Francisco. It's a world built on shadows.
And that uncertainty gave the media the perfect opening. They didn't have a concrete motive, so they just created their own narrative.
They turned Cunanan into what sociologists call a folk devil.
That term folk devil is so spot on. The coverage was relentless, focusing on his sexuality, his alleged drug use, meth, cocaine, and his alleged HIV status.
We had media anchors flat out calling him a homicidal homosexual.
They just manufactured a simple monster.
And what's so crucial here is that the autopsy later confirmed he was HIV negative. But the facts didn't matter.
Yeah.
The goal was demonization. The moral panic around his identity just completely replaced the difficult work of finding a real motive. It was a convenient scapegoat.
So the media gives us the simple monster, but what does the research say about what actually creates a man capable of that kind of violence? Let's move from the media spectacle to the psychology.
Well, if we look at Cunanan's developmental factors, his erratic and violent behavior, he dislocated his own mother's arm. It may stem from watching his father abuse his mother.
So that's the social learning theory, right? We learn violent behavior by seeing it.
We learn it by witnessing and modeling it, yes. And that connects directly to the broader picture of trauma, which is where the sources bring up adverse childhood experiences.
ACs.
Yes, ACs. For anyone listening who hasn't heard that term, it stands for adverse childhood experiences. It covers major trauma like abuse, neglect, or serious household dysfunction.
Like witnessing domestic violence or having a parent with addiction issues.
Exactly. And the research shows that high ACE scores correlate directly with negative health outcomes and high-risk behavior later in life.
So if an individual like Cunanan has these multiple rejections later in life from friends, boyfriends, his father, a sugar daddy, on top of that foundational trauma, you can see a trajectory forming.
You can. And the sources compel us to see how that individual chaos is mirrored by a kind of structural chaos. We see how individual trauma creates violence, but our systems can produce trauma on a massive scale.
Which is why researchers advocate for treating something like a school shooting, not just as a crime, but as a public health issue.
It's treating violence like a disease, an epidemic that you can try to mitigate.
And the sources suggest a solution is softening schools. More counselors, more psychologists, better communication to identify and treat students with trauma backgrounds early on.
It's prevention, not just reaction.
Yeah.
And this connects to the even bigger picture. The CDC has now formally declared racism a serious public health threat.
Because racism itself is a form of trauma.
It's caused by direct, vicarious, and transmitted traumatic stressors. And you see the consequences everywhere. Look at the statistics.
Give us some of those numbers.
African Americans make up about 33% of the total prison population, a massive overrepresentation. And in 2018, nearly 40% of the Hispanic community reported being verbally attacked just for speaking Spanish.
These are real, ongoing examples of structural violence.
And the institutions designed to contain these problems often just make the trauma worse. The stats on women's incarceration are shocking up 750% in 3 decades, twice the rate of men.
With almost no gender-responsive programming to deal with their specific histories of trauma.
And there's one specific detail from the sources that really stands out as a symbol of this systemic failure. It's the practice of shackling pregnant women.
Shackling pregnant women during labor? That sounds just horrific.
It is. Experts note it can interfere with their balance, increase falls, cause severe physical injury like hip dislocation or torn stomach muscles.
But the psychological harm?
Is just as significant. These women often have pre-existing trauma. And the experience of being restrained, controlled, especially during a vulnerable moment like childbirth, it re-traumatizes them. It worsens PTSD. It gets in the way of mother-infant bonding.
The system, intended to manage crisis, is actually replicating trauma, which... Okay, let's pivot now to the moral panic, because this is where Cunanan's world of alleged drug use intersected with this massive institutional response.
San Diego was at one point called the meth capital of the world, and it was facing what they called a double epidemic of meth use and HIV in the community.
That double threat fueled a huge moral panic, which the media's focus on Cunanan just amplified.
And what's so interesting is how the apparatus formed to respond. It wasn't just police.
Right.
No. Law enforcement, public health officials, researchers, they all came together into what the sources call the anti-meth apparatus.
Yeah.
And their unified goal, despite some different opinions, was to produce productive members of society.
And they did that with highly moralizing, fear-based campaigns. We see it in that notorious $17 million Me Not Meth campaign.
Oh yeah, the dark, stark imagery on billboards and TV. You had actors saying things like, "I lost me to meth."
And maybe the most damaging line of all, I lost my common sense and got HIV.
The goal of that discourse is just devastatingly simple and effective. It creates a clear binary. You have the good gays, clean, sober, respectable, versus the bad gays, who are irrational, diseased, and dangerous.
It reinforces this immense stigma.
And
It totally ignores why people use meth in the first place.
it completely ignores that people often use it for self-medication, to cope with depression, anxiety, the trauma they've already experienced.
Yeah.
So this apparatus forces the addict to construct a whole new identity just to survive.
So how do people caught in this navigate that pressure? The sources detail some brilliant, if desperate, survival strategies.
We see a real contrast between strategies and tactics. Take Max, for instance. He successfully transformed his identity into what the institutions wanted, a recovering addict, by strictly embracing the language, the structure, the ideology of the 12-step program. That rigid adherence was his key to getting housing, getting a job. He mastered the performance of sobriety.
Then you have someone like William, who was an active meth user, but had a different tactic.
Right. William learned to maintain a facade, a sober, respectable, harmless persona in his interactions with doctors, police, researchers.
He wasn't sober, but he could perform it.
He mastered the performance to get advocacy in his HIV treatment and to avoid being arrested. He basically gamed the system.
And then there's Sam.
And finally, there's Sam, homeless, constantly struggling. He relied purely on short-term tactics. He would recite 12-step mantras to get a quick favor or some charity, but he couldn't develop a long-term strategy.
And the apparatus, which was underfunded, failed him.
It failed to give him the skills he needed: psychotherapy, job training. He knew the words, but he couldn't build a life, which just shows the ultimate failure of the system to actually help.
And that conflict just continues. The sources noted law enforcement often harassing people, confiscating legal syringes from needle exchange clients, which just drives users back to dangerous practices.
This push and pull over morality is what structures the whole scene.
We started with the spectacular crime of Andrew Cunanan, a man in a world of wealth and delusion. We end with these deep, invisible forces shaping the lives of millions today.
The underlying thread through all of it, from Versace's Medusa promising addictive allure to the Me Not Mess campaigns demanding shame, is the societal construction of morality.
What we label as normal or abnormal.
Yeah. And that dictates both individual behavior, like Cunan's escape into fantasy, and institutional responses, like the cruelty of the anti-meth apparatus or those prison policies.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to consider. Given these deep connections we've talked about between childhood adversity, those ACEs, systemic trauma like racism, and then later high-risk behavior and crime, when we focus only on the shocking final act of a killer or the moral failure of an addict, are we ignoring the political and structural violence that created the conditions for that suffering in the first place?
And if we ignore that root cause, how can we possibly expect the cycle of violence and trauma to ever truly break?